Picture this. You're standing at the edge of shallow water, hole somewhere in eastern Africa. It's noon. It's brutal. The ground is cracked and pale, and the air smells like hot dust and something vaguely animal. You've been walking since before sunrise. You crouch down, cup some water, drink, and then, because there's nothing else to do and your legs hurt, you sit next to the small fire someone left burning nearby to keep animals off. The smoke drifts. You breathe it in. You don't think about it. Nobody does. Now fast forward about 12,000 years. Someone, somewhere, is doing that deliberately. That gap between the smoke you couldn't avoid and the smoke you chose is where one of the strangest and oldest stories in human history lives. And today we're going to trace it all the way back. Not to colonial trade ships, not to Marlboro ads, not to the guy at the concert who stands directly upwind of everyone. We're going back to the moment when a human being first looked at burning plant matter and thought, I want more of that. And here's the thing that should already be making you lean forward slightly. That moment almost certainly didn't happen because anyone planned it. Before the pipe, there was the nose. Let's establish something foundational before we get into archaeology and ritual and the genuinely unhinged behavior of Siberian reindeer. The human nose is a problem, not architecturally, though sure fine also that, but biologically. We breathe approximately 20,000 times a day. Every breath is a sampling of whatever is in the air around us. For most of human prehistory, a significant portion of that air, especially at night, especially in sheltered spaces, was smoke. The oldest confirmed evidence of our ancestors using controlled fire comes from Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, dated to roughly 1 million years ago. 1 million. At that point, we weren't even fully modern humans. Homo erectus, heavier brow, smaller brain, deeply uninterested in your opinions, was already managing sustained fire inside an enclosed cave. We know this not from charred wood, which doesn't last that long, but from burnt animal bone and carbonized plant ash found in a distribution that couldn't have come from a natural wildfire. So here's what that means. For somewhere between 1 million and 300,000 years, the rough window between Homo erectus and early Homo sapiens, hominids were sitting in enclosed or semi-enclosed spaces, breathing smoke every single day. It wasn't optional. It wasn't recreational. It was just air, but worse and also warmer. Now, were they burning? Wood mostly. But here's where the story gets chemically interesting. When organic matter combusts, it doesn't produce some clean universal smoke. It produces a cocktail of compounds specific to whatever is burning. And across Africa, Asia, and Europe, many of the plants that grew near human settlements that humans would have gathered, cooked, or simply had nearby, released psychoactive compounds when burned. Alkaloids, terpenes, cannabinoids. The human brain, it turns out, has an entire dedicated system of receptors for cannabinoids. The endocannabinoid system. It regulates mood, memory, appetite, sleep, pain, basically your brain's internal editorial department. And crucially, it did not evolve because of cannabis. It evolved for internal regulatory reasons that we still don't fully understand. But the side effect of its existence is this. The first time a hominid accidentally breathed the smoke of a burning cannabis plant, their brain didn't panic. Their brain recognized the compounds. It had the molecular equivalent of a key for that lock, already installed, waiting. So the experience wasn't confusion. It was, and there's no more precise way to say this, a pleasant surprise. Multiply that surprise across tens of thousands of generations, across every campfire where the wrong plant happened to be used as fuel, and you start to understand how the desire to inhale smoke might have gone from accident to pattern to ritual without anyone ever making a single conscious decision start. That's not a drug origin story. That's an evolutionary one. Here's the frustrating thing about studying prehistoric behavior. The further back you go, the less survives. Stone tools from 3 million years ago are sitting in museums right now because stone is effectively immortal. But a pouch of dried herbs? A wooden tube used to direct smoke? A basket of plant seeds selected for their particular effect when burned? Those are gone, dissolved, returned to the earth centuries before the first archaeologist was born. So when researchers try to date intentional smoking, they're not working with a clean timeline. They're working with whatever happened to survive, which is always the exception, never the rule. The oldest direct physical evidence of intentional cannabis inhalation we currently have comes from a site in the Pamir Mountains, the high-altitude range running through modern-day Tajikistan and western China. Archaeologists excavating burial sites from around 500 BC found wooden braziers containing stones that had been heated to extremely high temperatures. The residue on those stones tested positive for cannabis with unusually elevated THC content. This wasn't industrial hemp. Someone had selected high-potency cannabis, placed it on superheated stones, and inhaled the result. In a ritual burial context, 2,500 years ago. That's our hard floor, but the ceiling is almost certainly much higher. Consider what happened when archaeologists started excavating the burial mounds of the Scythians, a nomadic people from the Eurasian steppe who were, by most historical accounts, living their best lives. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, described them constructing small felt tents, placing heated stones inside, and throwing hemp onto those stones, then inhaling the smoke collectively. He noted, with what reads as genuine journalistic restraint, that they seemed to enjoy this considerably. For generations, scholars assumed Herodotus was exaggerating. He had a reputation for dramatic embellishment, to put it politely. Then excavations happened. Bronze braziers, superheated stones, hemp residue. Exactly the setup he described, buried with the dead, ready for whatever came next. Herodotus wasn't embellishing. He was underreporting. The man watched people hotbox a felt tent and wrote it up as a travel observation. Now let's cross an ocean, because the tobacco story is completely separate and equally strange. Tobacco, genus Nicotiana, is native exclusively to the Americas. This one geographic fact reshapes the entire history of smoking as most people understand it. Every culture in Europe, Africa, and Asia had zero access to tobacco until the late 15th century. Whatever they were smoking before that, and they were definitely smoking things before that, it wasn't this. When Columbus arrived in the Caribbean in 1492, his journal records something that clearly baffled him. The Taino people were walking around with rolled dried leaves, one end burning, the other end in their mouth, inhaling and exhaling the smoke with what he described as evident purpose and calm. His crew watched for a while. Then, because curiosity is a powerful force and sailors have a lot of free time, they tried it. They coughed. They kept going. Within weeks, several of them were addicted. Within decades, tobacco had reached the Spanish court. Within a century, it was a European obsession. The speed of that spread, from what is that to continental dependency in under 100 years, says something interesting about the plant, and possibly more interesting things about us. But here's what matters. Tobacco use in the Americas was ancient long before any European ship appeared on the horizon. Chemical residue testing of ancient pipes found in the southeastern United States has confirmed tobacco use going back at least 3,500 years. Some researchers believe the actual timeline extends much further, potentially tied to early agriculture in the Amazon basin, possibly 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. And in 2019, a discovery in the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah pushed the question back even further. A hearth dating to roughly 12,000 years ago contained a concentrated deposit of Nicotiana attenuata seeds, a wild tobacco species. Not scattered the way seeds blow in on the wind. Concentrated, placed in a hearth. This predates any known pipe or pottery in the region by thousands of years. So people were putting tobacco in a fire 12,000 years ago in North America. Whether they were inhaling the smoke directly, using it for ritual purposes, or both, we can't say with certainty. What we can say is that the relationship between humans and this specific plant is far older than any European ever guessed standing on a Caribbean beach in 1492. And if that's happening in Utah 12,000 years ago, what's happening simultaneously in Africa, in Asia, in the river valleys of ancient India, where other psychoactive plants grew wild and plentiful? The honest answer is probably something similar. We just haven't found the hearts yet. Now here's the part of the story that tends to make people either nod slowly or get slightly uncomfortable, sometimes both. In the 1980s, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA named Ronald Siegel proposed something that sounds outrageous until you actually look at the evidence. He argued that the pursuit of altered consciousness is not a cultural habit or a moral failing or a product of boredom. It's a biological drive, as fundamental as hunger, thirst, or reproduction. His argument was based partly on human behavior across cultures, which is compelling enough. But the more striking evidence came from animals. Elephants will travel significant distances to reach trees bearing fermented fruit and will eat until they're visibly intoxicated. Domestic cats respond to nepentolactone and catnip, with a behavior sequence that researchers have compared to opioid response. And then there are the Siberian reindeer. Reindeer in parts of Siberia have been observed actively seeking out Amanita and muscaria mushrooms, the red and white ones you'd recognize from fairy tale illustrations, and eating them. The psychoactive compound, muscimol, passes through the renal system largely intact. So other reindeer, having watched this, will then drink the urine of the reindeer who ate the mushrooms to get the same effect. Reindeer, figured out, recycling, psychoactive compounds, through urine. If a reindeer on the Siberian tundra independently arrived at that solution, it is perhaps not so surprising that early humans, with their considerably larger brains and their tendency to pay close attention to cause and effect, noticed that certain smoke made them feel different and started making choices accordingly. This is the intoxication hypothesis, and it reframes everything. If the drive to seek altered states is genuinely biological and ancient, then early humans weren't corrupted by plants or led astray by ritual. They were following an impulse written into them at a level that predates language, predates agriculture, predates the very concept of a decision. The campfire wasn't a temptation. It was a laboratory. Here's a sentence that will break your brain slightly if you think about it for more than 3 seconds. The oldest known medical documents in the world recommend inhaling smoke to treat lung disease. The Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text dating to around 1550 BC, itself a copy of text that may be centuries older, describes specific herbal preparations to be heated and inhaled for conditions affecting the respiratory system. The logic, while counterintuitive from where we stand, followed a clear internal reasoning. The lungs need treatment. Smoke reaches the lungs directly, therefore deliver the medicine via smoke. This is not entirely wrong. Henbane, one of the plants the Egyptians used this way, contains compounds with genuine bronchodilatory effects. The ancient Egyptians were not guessing randomly. They were applying 2,000 plus years of accumulated empirical knowledge, trial and error, observation, refinement, to a delivery mechanism that actually worked. In ancient India, the Ayurvedic medical tradition described a practice called dhumapana, literally translated as smoke drinking. Detailed texts laid out specific plants, specific conditions they treated, specific preparation methods, and contraindications. This wasn't folk remedy. It was a sophisticated pharmacological system, documented, debated, and refined over centuries. Hippocrates, whose name medical students still invoke in their graduation oath, wrote about the therapeutic inhalation of herbal vapors. In ancient China, in Mesopotamia, in the classical Mediterranean world, wherever we find early medical writing, we find some version of intentional smoke inhalation as a recognized treatment. We still do this, by the way. Asthma inhalers, anesthetic gases, nebulized medications. The fundamental logic of getting a compound into the bloodstream through the lungs hasn't changed. What changed is we stopped setting the medicine on fire first. A meaningful improvement, arguably. There's one more angle that doesn't come up nearly enough when people discuss the history of smoking, and it might be the most important one. Humans are not built to be alone. Every major development in human evolutionary history, language, cooperation, tool sharing, long-distance hunting, happened in groups. The group was the survival unit. And groups require trust. Deep, tested, bone-level trust, the kind that holds when something goes badly wrong at 3 in the morning and everyone is scared. That kind of trust doesn't come from a handshake. It comes from shared experience, shared vulnerability, the feeling of having gone somewhere together mentally, emotionally, experientially, and come back. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what our ancestors apparently worked out empirically. Shared rituals synchronize neural activity between participants. They measurably increase trust. They deepen group identity in ways that outlast the ritual itself. The bond formed between people who undergo an intense shared experience together is qualitatively different from the bond between people who've simply spent time near each other. Now imagine a group of early humans, 10, 15 people, sitting in an enclosed space, breathing in smoke from burning herbs, entering a shared, altered state together. The boundaries between self and group soften a little. Everyone is experiencing the same thing simultaneously. The experience becomes a reference point, a shared memory, a mark of belonging. That wasn't decadence. That was social engineering of the most sophisticated kind available at the time. The ritual smoke circle was how you built the kind of group that could go hunt a mammoth together the next morning without anyone losing their nerve. It was infrastructure, invisible, inhaled, and extremely effective. The sacred to industrial pipeline is not a story unique to tobacco, but tobacco is its most dramatic example. When indigenous American cultures used tobacco, they used it within structures, ceremonial, social, seasonal, that governed how much, how often, for what purpose. A substance used ritually is, by definition, not used constantly. The ritual is the container. The container is what makes something manageable. European contact stripped the container away. Within a century of tobacco's arrival in Europe, it had become a daily habit for millions of people. Within 2 centuries, it was a globally traded commodity. By the early 20th century, the industrialized cigarette, cheap, consistent, portable, and chemically engineered for maximum absorption speed, had made tobacco the most widely used psychoactive substance in human history. And then the industry that built this did something that remains one of the more extraordinary acts of organized deception in modern history. Their own scientists, working internally, compiled evidence to the 1950s that cigarette smoking caused lung cancer. The companies buried it. They funded counter-research. They hired physicians to appear in advertisements. They added ammonia compounds to cigarette formulas specifically to accelerate nicotine delivery to the brain, which shortened the time between inhalation and the craving for the next cigarette. They took a plant that indigenous cultures had kept sacred and bounded for thousands of years and turned it into a delivery mechanism specifically optimized for addiction and profit. A shaman placing carefully selected cannabis on heated stones in a mountain burial chamber 2,500 years ago, and a cigarette company chemist in 1955 designing a faster-hitting nicotine delivery system are, on the surface, doing something adjacent. In every other way, they're doing something entirely opposite. So, when did humans start smoking? The honest answer is earlier than we can prove, and probably for reasons that would surprise you. The physical evidence puts intentional use of psychoactive smoke at a minimum of 2,500 years ago with confidence, 12,000 years ago with strong suggestive evidence, and quite possibly much further back on behavioral and biological grounds that leave no archaeological trace. The drive underlying it, the curiosity about altered states, the attention to cause and effect, the willingness to repeat a pleasant experience deliberately, that may be as old as human cognition itself. It may predate Homo sapiens entirely. What the record makes clear is this. By the time any civilization thought to write anything down, the habit was already ancient, already ritualized, already medicalized, already social. Whatever it looked like in its earliest form, it was not simple. It was not accidental in any continuous sense. It was chosen and refined and passed forward. Go back to that waterhole, the cracked earth, the midday heat, the fire someone left burning nearby. The smoke drifts. You breathe it in without thinking. Somewhere in that breath is the beginning of a question. Not a plan, not a habit, just a flicker of awareness. That was different. And the thing that makes us human, The thing that separates that moment from every other animal sitting near every other fire is that we noticed, we paid attention, we wondered why. We've been wondering ever since.